A year or two went by, and it was blatantly obvious that everything that I predicted was coming true. So they asked me then if I could predict when the economy would fail. Well, I thought that was an odd request, actually. And in fact, I thought it reflected a lack of integrity. What were they trying to do? If it was going to fail, say 10 years or 20 years down the road, were they going to, evade the issues? I mean, why would you ask if we could predict when the economy would fail?
The interesting part in that too is that they didn't ask you if it would fail, they asked you when it would fail, because these people work for the banks and they know it's a private system and they know that it is going to fail. It has to, it's designed that way, so that's quite an interesting point as well.
Absolutely right. If you look at the major donations to every candidate on both sides of the aisle and every political party in every country in the world, it's the central banking system. And what they're doing is they're lining up a set of figureheads in front of us. They own the media. This is why you can't learn about the real problem in the real press, the so-called real press, which of course is the phony press. Anyway, they did ask me to predict this, and as an experiment, I went along for the ride, so to speak. I explained that it was entirely plausible to actually produce very accurate models to predict the maximum possible lifespan of any given system. All I needed to know was what kind of regulatory policy they intended to impose, and that being how much money are you going to allow into circulation? How much are you going to allow the circulation to grow? What interest rates are you going to charge? Well, in fact, they didn't even know. So I used a term a while back, artificial sustention. Artificial sustention is a term I came up with a long time ago, which is it's a matter of identifying the ways that you can artificially extend the lifespan of such a system for some temporary while. All methods of artificial sustention will fail. Of course, way back I was mathematically analyzing, well, how can you perpetuate the thing? Or do you have to fix it? In fact, you have to fix it. You have to resolve this facade of economy to actual economy. We don't have economy. We call this economy routinely, but all that these systems are is a process which artificially multiplies artificial indebtedness at an ever-escalating rate until we succumb to failure. Every such system has failed in all world history. So it can only fail.
Fascinating stuff, Mike, but we're going to have to take a break here. So we will come back in a few minutes and we will continue this after the break.
Okay.
So welcome back, folks. We're here with Mike Montagne. We are talking about the mathematically perfect economy. And this may be what is being implemented in Iceland because they've had a catastrophic failure over there. So they're sort of doing battle with the IMF at the moment. I've been speaking to you about that on other shows. And Mike was just explaining what he'd been doing and his history with the Reagan administration and the fact that he's been presenting this system to governments for years and they keep rejecting it, which is a very good indication of who these governments actually work for. So, Mike, I'll just let you continue with what you were saying.
Absolutely. They don't reject this idea exactly. What they do is run and hide. There's no arguments against mathematically perfected economy. We've given three solutions for three categoric faults. Inflation and deflation. Well, they're defined as increases or decreases in money per represented wealth. And so it's mathematically obvious that the only way to eradicate inflation and deflation is to maintain a circulation which at all times is equal to the remaining value of represented property. So you might create a promissory note equal to the principal, and then you pay that off at the rate of consumption or depreciation, and inflation and deflation are solved. That's the only solution for inflation and deflation. So these people can't reject these things. They don't say, oh, that's not true, and this is why it's not true. Because they can't say it's not true, because if I ask them why it's not true, they can't give a valid reason. There's no argument against the solution. There's no argument against the other fault, which is inherent irreversible multiplication of artificial indebtedness by interest, Because the interest causes and irreversibly causes inherent irreversible multiplication of artificial indebtedness until we succumb to failure. So there's no argument against solution. The only solution for that, of course, is to eradicate interest, and by doing those two things, solving inflation and deflation and solving inherent multiplication of debt by interest, we've actually solved the third categoric fault, which I gave as the second, and that is systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property. So there's no real question that there is one and one only solution, and that is mathematically perfected economy, which is simply eradication of interest and a schedule of payment of debts which are not subject to interest at the rate of consumption or depreciation. That's mathematically perfected economy in a nutshell. In any case, the Reagan administration asked if I could produce models which projected the maximum possible lifespan of any economy based on interest-bearing debt, and so I did so. I spent about 5-6 months writing these models back in the early 1980s. And those models actually had to account for what I call artificial sustention. And I don't know that your program is so long that we could explain all these things and how we resolve them. But basically, as interest multiplies the sum of debt in proportion to the circulation, and then debt is just getting phenomenally huge, you have to reduce interest rates at some point so that industry can still afford to service this escalating sum of debt. So interest rates have to be decreased at a like escalating rate in order to sustain the system as long as possible. And when I asked the Reagan administration, okay, so what rates of interest are you going to impose upon us? How much are you going to de-escalate interest? What is going to be your trigger for doing that? They didn't even know. And none of these people really know. They just realize that, well, the economy is going down, so we reduce interest. So my model actually deployed a logic, an algorithm, which reduced interest enough for the economy to sustain itself. So it basically also projected how much they were going to have to decrease interest rates up until now, since 1983, 1984. And those models run in 1983 and 84 with 1980s figures, that is circulation, circulatory growth, and it projected the pattern of interest de-escalation. Those models projected that the maximum possible lifespan, or a maximum practical lifespan, of this particular instance of the world economy based on interest-bearing debt would fail at approximately 2010 AD, the current year. And that information, actually, those models, even, you can download them from our web pages. They're complete with source code and documentation, tell you how to run them. Of course, with the source code, you can modify them to account for any further thing you deem that necessary, although, of course, our original implementations were sufficiently comprehensive and exhaustive to produce inevitable failure at 2010 AD. So these things have been known for a long time. That material's been available for a long time. Unfortunately, since I maintained web pages from the very first days of the internet, my material is some of the most plagiarized theses out there. It's the original proof of inevitable failure. These people who call these things Ponzi schemes and pyramid schemes, didn't do the original thinking, which recognized that these systems inevitably fail. But yet there's a tremendous amount of concurring mathematics study. For instance, the Kondratiev or long wave theory is about this cycle of failure. And it derives from a branch of mathematics, which is, people need to understand that the branch is numeric methods, which are something like ballistics are calculated today. In other words, numeric methods are a branch of mathematics which, when an issue is not understood, the data of the issue, nonetheless, forms some pattern of progress through time in the case of economy, for instance. And so this pattern can be replicated for whatever known conditions may affect the pattern in any known way. So we devise a mathematical a formula to replicate and extend a pattern, but that doesn't give us what is the fault of this. And in the case, what we need to understand, insofar as my models are concerned, is that all that my models do is borrow money back into circulation at the rate that you have to borrow it back into circulation to maintain a circulation. So if you're paying P principal and I interest out of circulation on a given day, and to maintain a vital circulation, that has to be borrowed back into circulation. Borrowing P back maintains a base or initial debt of P, and borrowing I back increases the sum of debt I. And that's all that the model really does its basic modus operandi is to just borrow money back into circulation at the rate that it's necessary to maintain a vital circulation. And